One of the things that I often say is that the key to hitting is also the key to success and the key to life, and that's dynamic adjustability, right? Sometimes life throws you a curveball, okay? And you have to learn how to take a crappy situation and turn it into something awesome, right? And that's just the reality and the nature of how these things work, okay? COVID was a proverbial curveball, right? That was something that threw us all for a loop, right? My family and I, we were living in California at the time, and we chose to take advantage of the situation, right? We chose to get a camper and spend 3 months exploring the country, 3 months on the road. We ended up spending 2 weeks out here in Knoxville and absolutely fell in love with it, right? And then we chose to move. Now that was a tough thing. That was a big move. That was a tough choice, right? My kids are 11. At the time they were 9. They were going to the elementary school that my wife went to, right? They were growing up in the same neighborhood. That's a pretty special thing. Their grandparents lived in the house behind us, right? Their mom and dad and aunt and uncle and cousins also lived in the same neighborhood. So that was a big choice. That was tough. And when we were sitting down talking about that decision, right, that's choosing faith over fear, right? Anytime we have these situations, you have a choice to make. You have a choice. You can choose to have faith that there's some sort of plan there for you. And the reason that those difficulties showed up or happened is because there was something better and so much better on the other side. And sometimes that choice is difficult. It's really difficult. Well, in the process of moving out here, right, my buddy Doc Kennedy, right, anybody that knows him, he is just an incredible man. He's an incredible human being, and he is just a conduit for the Lord and for amazing things. And he's a connector, right? And one of the people that he ended up connecting me with was Kumar Rocker, right? And anybody that knows about this situation, he had a curveball thrown at him too, right? He got drafted in the first round last year by the New York Mets, right? He went 10th overall. He thought his dreams were coming true. He thought he was going to be able to go and pursue his dreams in professional baseball. And then the Mets decided they didn't like his MRIs, so they weren't going to sign him, right? For Kumar, that's a difficult situation. It's a difficult situation. And I ended up coming out here, right, and meeting him. And we did an evaluation, okay? And after we talked about everything and kind of went through, we sat in Doc's barn, and, he couldn't throw off the mound at that time, so we just went off of all the old videos, right? And we sat there, we went through it, and we talked, and, anytime a player, all of us as coaches, right, one of the things that holds players back all the time is fear and fear of change. And the better they get, the harder it is to have the strength and the courage to decide to make that change or make an adjustment, right? And Kumar decided that he liked what he heard, right? And he was on a warpath. He's a different kind of guy. He's a different cat. When you're a freshman in college and you go to the World Series and throw a 19 strikeout no-hitter, that takes a monster, right? And he had something to prove now, right? So he made that choice, right? He chose faith over fear. Well, afterwards, right, Tim Corbin said physically he looks the best he's ever looked, and who knows, it might have been the best thing that ever happened to him, right? Kumar Rocker finally back, throwing hard as hell. Skip Bayless said, ever hear of a player drafted 10th overall one year, then 3rd overall the next? Vanderbilt's Kumar Rocker just pulled that off after the Mets rejected him over questions about arm health. Jared Sandler said less than 2 years ago, Kumar was seen as a lock to be the #1 overall pick. He's seemingly throwing better now than he was then. Surprising pick. Maybe it shouldn't be. Did he benefit from not signing with the Mets? The Rangers threw a metaphorical grenade in the draft with the 3rd overall pick. So he's probably going to end up with more money this year than he did last year. This is what he looked like before. This was him at Vanderbilt. Take a look at the arm action. Yesterday we talked about arm path efficiency, right? How the arm moves through space has a lot to do with both injuries and velocity. And it's something that we have to pay attention to as coaches, tremendous attention to. I can tell you right now, that's why I'm able to stand up here. This was one of the first things that we were on back in 2012, 2013. When we talk about arm path efficiency, right, it's about these four things. Energy moves proximal to distal. When we land, right, you have to think about it like we're a tornado, right? We're rotating around our spine. And we want that ball inside of that line of the tornado. And when we rotate, it has to get launched out and away from us, close to away. Supination to pronation, right? Supinated, pronated, supinated, pronated. We want to land in somewhat of a supinated position, and as we rotate through that throw, the arm should be unwinding into pronation. Flexion, right, to extension. It should be close and then work out away. And plane-specific force, okay? Forces are plane-specific. If we're rotating around our spine, right, through a plane of motion, right, our optimal force is going to be if our arm is moving outward on that same exact plane. Now, here's the interesting thing. How about that? Wow. That wasn't after he worked. That was high school. That was high school. Okay? One of the first things we do when we do evaluations, and this is exactly what we sat down and looked at with Kumar when we looked at video. We didn't just look at video now. We want to look at video as far back as we can find it. I want to see how they threw when they were 12, right? Because that's how they were generally designed to throw. One of the most amazing things we've seen in all these years, right? Kids represent the closest thing biomechanically to elites in so many ways. Kids throw naturally. Throwing is a natural motion, in my opinion, despite what many people hear, right? So this is what it looked like in high school. Now, Paul Nyman, right? Paul Nyman is a brilliant dude. I mentioned him yesterday, right? A lot of where this game has gone, we can look back at the work that he did at SEPPRO, right? So Rocker has recently surfaced and is now preparing for 22. I've been able to find some video, and possibly the best thing for his throwing a baseball was not being signed by the Mets. What I really didn't like about Rocker's mechanics was that it was considered a linear push. So when you saw that video earlier, think about how the arm was working, right? It was this way, right? A linear push. Take a look at the difference. So this is before on the left, and that's after on the right. So how did we do it? What did we do? Why did we do it? What did the process look like? Well, first, rotational rate of force development, right, equals efficiency. Rotational rate of force development is everything, and you want to train it. Efficiency is king. Efficiency is king, right? All biological organisms crave efficiency. How easy can we do something? How effortless can it look? And that happens from focusing on deceleration patterns, right? You've heard multiple guys talk about it today. Decel patterns are everything, right? We always hear that saying, your body can only go as fast as it can stop, right? And I heard that before. You hear that like your whole life, but it really doesn't always resonate and make sense for what it means. When you're sitting in a car and you're driving down the road 60 miles an hour, right? You're in the car is moving 60 miles an hour. But if you slam on the brakes hard, right, what happens to you? You get launched forward, right? That's what decel patterns are. When we move after we land, okay, we have to get to a stable position, and when we go to turn, our pelvis has to stop first, then our trunk stops, and then the arm goes. Rotational rate of force development and having it a really quality rotational rate of force development is why you always hear coaches say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, be easy. Because they're not, the guys that do that really well, they're not really throwing the ball until they land. They're not throwing it till the end, right? They're reaching back at the end, they're loading up, but when they're really gonna throw their punch, that's after they hit the ground. That's when they're gonna throw their punch, and that's the rotational rate of force development. For that to happen, right, the first thing that has to happen, the trunk has to compress the lead leg between the pelvis and the stable ground. So after we land, when we talk about, think about ground forces, right? Everybody talks about ground forces. Ground force is created by us sending energy into the floor to get it back out. Lead leg blocking, as we think about it, people always look at it and they think it's this. That's not lead leg blocking. That's continuing rotation. After we land, our upper body has to pin that leg to the ground like a pogo stick. And the faster that happens, the higher that rotational rate of force development is going to be, because that deceleration pattern is going to be better. The upper body initiates the deceleration pattern by stopping the pelvis. This kid in this video throwing, it's not a kid that we worked with, but it's a kid that I saw, and it was one of the nastiest deliveries I ever seen. So we, clipped the video and kept a GIF of it. So this was at the PG All-American game. This kid's like 17 years old, 16 years old. I believe he was a junior in high school, right? And he's throwing 98. And he's like 6 foot, 175 pounds, throwing absolute fuel and making it look so easy. He's under so much control. It's so efficient. Watch his lead leg. Now, one of the interesting things about it when we think about lead leg blocking, maybe you guys notice that when pitchers go forward, a lot of them you'll see the pelvis go this way, and you'll see the back knee or the foot kind of peel open, right? It's spiraling, right, as we're moving forward. When we land, that same thing has to happen. When we pin that leg to the ground, it's about getting the force to the outside of the lead foot as quickly as we can. It's another spiral of energy. This one's out, and this one is down and in. And by focusing on improving arm path efficiency in decel sequences, incredible things happen. Earlier, one of the coaches here asked a great question. He said, well, for us as high school coaches or college coaches, what would you focus on first? What would you work on? My answer to that would be rotational rate of force development and decel patterns. And the reason is because the benefits are so large. If you focus on command, right, you have some athletes who are elite athletes, and they can compensate really well. They'll find a way to achieve the task. But a lot of people don't have that same ability, right? And if you focus on command, you might not move better. Sometimes you might move worse. You focus on pitch development, you might not move better. You might move worse, right? Your arm might start to hurt. But when you focus on rotational rate of force development and stability, man, you get arm path, your body starts to move in a stable way, right? And the efficiency that gets created that has so many benefits in all of those other categories, right? So one of the things we always talk about is how can we do these things better? How can we get it to transfer? I was talking to a pitching coordinator not long ago, and he's like, Bleak, I don't know how we get these guys to understand this, but we have players that are, they're gaining mobility, right? They're getting stronger, right? But they're pitching worse. They're pitching worse. So what we did, obviously, with that player isn't working. We can't always look to mobilizing them or just getting them stronger as the answer, right? The skill is what needs to get better. The ability for the body to move in the skill is what needs to get better. So movement screens need to translate, and they need to translate to actionable and tangible results. And this is something I've been talking about for a really long time. I have a problem with the way that some of the movement screens are done and they're being used because they're not being applied, right? We're not getting any application or tangible result out of that. And that's exactly why we created that map, right? Because it gives us the ability to explore different positions and angles that may work for that individual's body. And that's the path of least resistance. When we think about throwing or hitting, right, we're moving a weight through space, just like in the weight room. And if you're in the weight room and you're doing a squat and somebody has really tight hips, right, what do you have to do to get them to be able to squat lower? You have to change the nature of the positioning. You have to toe them out, put their pelvis in a more open pack position, and now they have room. Now they can actually move differently. Hitting and throwing are no different, right? They're no different. So we're focusing on all these other mechanical things, but we're not optimizing putting that individual in their best position to rotate. And I personally feel like we should start there. And by doing that, that's changed a lot of things for us, right? That's why we went down this route. That's why we've had success with it. So what does that look like? Well, as we go through it, so this wasn't on his first day, but when you see these Waterbag turns versus the ones after, they're going to look drastically different. So earlier, Doug mentioned the importance of having the athlete make the choice. And Doug, I could not agree more, right? We could know what we want to happen, and we could tell them we want it to happen, but if they're not bought in and it ain't their choice, it ain't gonna happen. It doesn't matter, right? So when we do these evaluations with players, we have them explore the different angles. So we start at 1, and then we go through 5, and we don't tell them anything. We just have them put the water bag on their back and tell them to throw a ball as hard as they can, right? And they will show you what they do when they pitch. They will show you what they do when they hit. They're showing you the movement solutions that their brain is choosing. When we went through Kumar's, okay, his looked kind of like this, right? He was very pelvis-driven first, right? So the water wasn't making much noise. It really wasn't moving very much. As he went through all the positions, at the end of it, I asked him, okay, which one felt the best? Which one felt the most stable? He said, well, 4. This one, right? The one that was slightly closed off. That one felt the best. So then the next time we had him go through it, and all I explained to him, I said, Kumar, I said, if you're going to throw a punch, right, are you going to open here first to drag your upper body, or are you going to throw it from right here, from the center of the chest? And he said, well, probably from right here. I said, this next time I want you to go through all the angles again, except this time I want you to focus on throwing your punch from right here. And as he went through it, he said, yeah, that was different. That was different. Now all of a sudden the water is starting to make noise. So he was able to feel something different that he hadn't necessarily felt before. And it's not being done with a baseball, it's being done with another implement, right? So after we went through that, right, then we went to the recoil, right? So now I said, okay, Kumar, I said, if you're going to crack a whip, right, do you focus on going forward or you focus on pulling back? And he says, pulling back. I said, exactly. You're sending energy to the tip of the whip. You don't think about going forward. Our brain maps backwards, okay? So because our brain maps backwards, if we think about things that happened at the end, our brain puts our body in a position to achieve a lot of the other things that should happen earlier. So after explaining that, we went through the same exact sequence, 1 through 5. At the end of that, he was literally laughing. Like the water was exploding, right? He felt something totally different. It was a totally different deal. Now, this is one of the ways we like to look at the body, okay? We look at the upper body as the cannon, because that's really what's throwing the punch, right? The job of the pelvis and the legs is to hold on to the ground for stability, but it can't have stability if the cannon is not putting pressure into it. The cannon has to pin it to the floor. The throw, the swing, it's being initiated from up here. It's being loaded from up here, and it's being delivered from up here, and that's where the rotation happens, right? The pelvis is the boat, the legs are the ropes, and the feet are the anchors. If you want to fire a cannon from a canoe, you better anchor it down from both sides. You better have some kind of stability and anchor points pulling against one another so the upper body can actually deliver that punch. One of the things that I often talk about is comparing the body to opening a pickle jar, right? If you're going to open a jar, right, and this is the same kind of thing. We're trying to rotate up top. We're trying to create that torque force up top. If you're going to open a jar, you don't turn it from the bottom to open the top. That's not going to work. And if you turn it from the top, but you let the bottom get pulled with it, that's also not going to work. You have 2 choices, right? Stabilize the bottom so the top can turn or go opposite directions. Now, one of the awesome things about connecting with a lab, right? We had the opportunity, we connected with M1 and Dr. Emily Faree, who's brilliant. Back in, I think it was 2016, we started doing research together. And we've got to test a lot of amazing things. And this is the results of one of the tests we did. So what would happen if the athlete intentionally tried to move with their pelvis first versus their trunk first versus recoiling? Take a look at the differences in those numbers, right? Pelvis first, max GRF 1501, torso 1453, recoil 1635. Torso velocity 1150, torso first 1508, and recoil 2061. How about the torso acceleration, right? And if you look at the research that's all coming out, torso, like thorax to arm, that's where the magic is, right? Look at the difference in the torso acceleration speeds. 21,668 in pelvis first, 30,461 in torso first, and 48,979 on the recoil. You want to talk about significant? That's significant. That's the reason why after we went down that road and started teaching people how to recoil, and I knew baseball was going to have a freaking heart attack. That's why we needed to have research behind it, right? When we did that recoil study, not only did we see velocities increase on the average of 3 to 5 miles an hour, but we also saw stress levels decrease by 38% overall in the sample group. That's ridiculous. Like in a lab study, 10% is significant. 38 is like game changing. We had athletes that were borderline like, they're gonna pop, they're gonna get injured, cut their stress levels in half, right? And say their arm felt the best it has ever felt. And in these years of doing this, I think the first time we did that was in sometime in 2018. When we do evaluations with players, after we go through all their stuff, they throw the way they throw, we try a whole bunch of different things out. We try different positions. One of the things that we try with every single person since we started this is having them recoil. We try it with everyone. And the amount of results that you get is incredible. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to do it well, because athletes interpret information differently. And maybe that particular athlete doesn't watch baseball, has never seen it before. Maybe they don't have a good feel for their body, but I'll tell you this. I would say 80% of the people that do it gain velocity in like 5 minutes. When we went and worked with UTSA back in, I think this was 19, went and worked with the college program. And while we were out there with John Wente and those boys, we did the evaluations there the same way we do them everywhere else. And we had a kid that had been on a velocity program for 6 months, and he was throwing 83, 84. And in 20 minutes, he was throwing 89. 20 minutes, he was throwing 89. That's a game changer. That's incredible. And he had been on a velocity program for a long time. Velocity is not being gained just by making your body stronger. It's being gained by moving in better sequencing, being in better positions, right? That's how we gain it. Now, I want you to take a look at these two deliveries here. When you look at him on the left with the Waterbag, right, and this is something we actually like to use as kind of a test to see how guys rotate and where their body wants to be positioned when they're moving dynamically and transitioning from the back to the front. Notice how he's striding closed. That's not cued. That's just him on his own, shuffling and trying to pimp the finish with the Waterbag. That's it. That's it. We didn't tell him to do anything except recoil the Waterbag. Take a look at his stride in high school. Take a look at the stride in high school. He was also striding closed. If you take a look at his stride in Vanderbilt, it was straight. Earlier, Rolando talked about the importance of stride direction and how it can change, and it's not even your fault, it's not on purpose sometimes, but just over time it changes. Now all of a sudden, a lot of other things change upstream. If you understand where an athlete moves best, right, and you can figure out how to get them to their optimal positions for stability, they're going to produce more force, rotate more efficiently, right, and have better direction and command, right? So that became really, really important. Now, take a look at Soroka on the left, right? And this, every time I watch this, Rolando, this like makes me nuts. So if you look at Soroka on the left here, look at that stride angle, okay? And look at the arm action. I mean, that's pretty. That's pretty. And then he got to pro ball, and then look at him on the right. And he's been constantly injured since. I don't know how it happened, but I know that his stride direction changed. I know that a lot of pitching coaches hate when guys stride closed. Guys, I got news for you. I don't care what you like, and neither does your player. This isn't about you. This is about them. This is about getting them in their best position to move. And just because the rubber's here and the plate's there doesn't mean you have to stride straight. It doesn't. Go look through history at how many elite and amazing major league pitchers had a closed stride. There's variation. There's allowable variation to this. It does not have to look the way that someone tells you in a book. What we do have to do is get our lower half in its best position to stabilize that rotation. So take a look at this real quick. This is a recent video that's been going around. This is a 13-year-old throwing 90 miles an hour. Look at his stride direction. Interesting. Really interesting. How does a 13-year-old throw 90 miles an hour? Well, that's how. And that's not just him. If you look at a video of Wesley Scott throwing 97 when he's 15, or throwing 93 when he was 14 at 5'10 and 160 pounds, he looked kind of like that too. And if you look at all the other guys that we've had over the years, we're really blessed to be in Southern California, but in these last, 8 years of doing this, we've had a lot of kids that have come in around 7th grade, right, that by the time they were freshmen in high school were 90 plus, and when they walked in, they were in the low to mid 70s, right? We've seen a lot of them. And guess what? They all ended up kind of looking like, not all the same, very different, right, but very easy early, but closed on that front hip, right? A little bit of closed angle on direction. And then if you look at videos of them when they were younger, it looked closer to that too. The only reason some of those things changed is because people told them it was supposed to change. If anybody changes how this kid moves and tells him you have to stride different, everything else is going to change for him. His arm action may change, his decel pattern may change, now he can't locate the ball. I bet you Soroka didn't have any trouble locating the ball before. I would venture to guess that some pitching coach said, you know what, you can't crossfire like that, we need you to stride straight. And then that changed to his decel pattern down low, right? So now he can't throw strikes, right? And then all of a sudden he can't throw strikes, so what do we got to do with the arm? Well, now we got to raise it, right, because we need the ball to go this way. It's a chain of events that ends up happening with people. Now, we talked about movement screens and how they transition, but what about the weight room? How do we transition the weight room to the actual skill, right? So this is a quote from Dr. Faree. She said, the weight room should be more than pushing heavy loads. It should be seen as a place to train efficient movement patterns, reactivity, and plane-specific rate of force development, right? Performance in sport is complex. It cannot be linearly correlated with just strength. Every single coach in here knows that the strongest guy on your team is probably not your best hitter, and he probably doesn't hit the ball the farthest, right? That happens quite a bit. And oftentimes there's also a small kid that throws really, really hard, right, or can't push a bunch of weight in the weight room, right? I mean, that's real. When you think about performance in sport, right, it's this multi-dimensional thing, right? Motor coordination and motor planning. How is the body moving? What is the timing of those movements? What is the sequencing of those movements, right? Rate of force development and plane-specific force transmission, right? How quickly can we rotate? How stable can we do it? And how efficient can we do it? For us, over these last few years, and this has been I don't care about sticking to a book. I don't care about that. And that's why I guess we've done all this stuff. Like, I don't care about being in the crowd of popular opinion. I care about getting results for my players. That's what I care about. At the end of the day, that's the only thing I care about. And in our journey at 108, we went from having 2 Cressy strength trainers and a Major League Baseball sports scientist and doing all these things by the book with all the best assessments available, right? Except all those assessments said our best players had problems, and all that strength training stuff, I just didn't see the kind of benefits that I expected to see in a lot of different ways with different players, right? We really have to start to bridge the gap between understanding that performance, right, over here and this thing over here, these should be married together. There has to be a bridge between them, right? You can get better strength in your legs, but if you're not working on it through rotation and stability through the same planes of motion, is that going to translate to a better deceleration pattern? Probably not. Probably not. So if the goal is here, and that's what they're getting paid to do, and you want to win more games, and that's what you're getting paid to do, well, I think it makes sense, right, to start taking these two things, marrying them together, right, and training the body in the weight room to move the way that it needs to on the field, right? So let's go into some drills and some things that we did with them. So we call these peelbacks, right? So change is often uncomfortable for people, but when you explore positions and angles, right, that may be more appropriate for their body, they adapt and they connect to it considerably faster. They start to feel it and make the choice. They start to say, okay, well, when I'm in this position, I don't stabilize well, and that doesn't feel very good. But when I'm in this position, that feels really good. That water's getting real loud, right? It feels really good. I feel really powerful. Generally, the position that you want, right, or that you're looking for is going to be the one that's going to be the most stable, the most balanced, right, produce the most force. They're going to start to make that choice. You're not going to have to tell them. They're going to make the choice on their own because they feel it. Now, the reason that we do peelbacks like this, right, is because we want the body to be nice and easy and slow early. And we don't want them to make the choice on their own to muscle up early and produce the force. So we have them peel back slow, and then we do it on a command basis, like a clap or a go command. I cannot express to you how amazing those things are and the differences you will see in the nature of how the human body moves when it has to react to something versus when your brain makes the choice to do it. You can make the choice to make a muscle, okay? You cannot make a choice to have the reflexive system begin to work. You can't make that choice. It's not possible, right? So to give you an example of what that means, so if you go on if you do a squat, right, and you have a bunch of load on the end of the bar, right? Imagine the difference between doing that squat versus doing a squat where you have bands hanging from the end of the bar and weights hanging from the end of the band. So when you do it, all of a sudden, through the exercise, your body is going to have to react to the unstable nature of the weight and the forces that are placed above you, right? You can't make the choice to make those pieces of the body work. And I got news for you. Those are the pieces that make greyhounds and elite baseball players and athletes rotate really fast and stop on a dime, right? So all of the exercises that you can imagine, like you'd want to take them and try to morph them or modify them to ways that you can have them actually react instead of making the choice, okay? So here's reaction boxes, okay? These are awesome. Like anytime you have a player and you give them this pre-programmed motor pattern, like with the lower half, all of a sudden their CNS is like on fire, right? It's on fire. And then when they have to react to something, a lot of times they do it way better. Now let's pay attention to the difference between these two. And this one on the left, right, he falls backwards. He loses his balance. He loses his stability. The one on the right, completely stable. So what's the difference? It wasn't a cue, wasn't a thought, wasn't a feel. It was a difference in the angle of the back foot on the boxes. In the one on the left, he was cued, or like the drill was stepping back and forth, right? And the one on the right, it was diagonal. So that put his body in a more closed position, right? Which gave him a different anchor point. Like I said earlier, he used to stride closed. When he was dynamically moving and doing the recoil with the Waterbag, he's striding closed, right? He stabilizes best and produces force best when he strides closed. So by putting his body in that position or doing that drill, that's what it gave him. Now, these are also things we tested in the lab. And these were the numbers. So when we did the stationary versus the taps versus the boxes. Now all of these, we were doing it with reaction, right? But one is just the stationary position, one is tapping up and down, and one is the boxes in and out, right? So the boxes in and out was by far the best, not even close. Now that doesn't mean we only do boxes, right? Like we still do the stationary because we want to elicit these good movements. And sometimes when guys do the boxes right away, the motor programming and motor planning isn't there yet, right? They can't be as stable. So we still do all of them, right? They all get good results, but the boxes really, really do incredible things, okay? So this is actually a drill. So for you old school guys that have studied a lot of stuff for a long time, so I learned this drill in 2008. This is a Fogel. Right? Tom House came up with this, except he was doing it with a towel, right? And the whole look at Tommy laughing, right? He remembers. This was a really popular drill, and Tom's thought process behind the drill was incredible. If I make the body tired through rotation, it's going to have to find a way to be more efficient. So we do these for various time lengths, but you're basically shuffling, turning, stopping, shuffling the other way, turning, stopping, and it's just back and forth, back and forth. The drill is amazing. It just wasn't amazing with a towel. But it's really nasty with a Waterbag, right? Because it really does increase the efficiency of the rotation. Guys start compensating less because their body starts to get tired. And they start to produce the force from up top, which is what's supposed to deliver the punch. Now, our performance training goal, when we think about it, we want to stress the system through the same movement patterns of hitting and throwing in a variety of ways. Right? We want variability. And here's the thing. So people talk about repeatability, pitching coaches that have been around a long time, and you're right, right? And we're talking about variability. But here's the difference between the two and where people get messed up, okay? There's this thing that's a philosophical thing. I believe Plato came up with it. And it's called the law of the one and the many. So if you and I sit here, right, and we both draw 5 circles, okay? My 5 circles, none of them will ever be the same. That's impossible. We all know that, right? Just like signing your name, can't do it the same way twice, okay? So my 5 are gonna be kind of similar but never be the same. Your 5 are gonna be kind of similar but they'll never be the same. And your 5 and my 5, they're totally different. They're totally different circles, okay? That represents the inevitable many, right? The inevitable variability that exists in the world. The one is based off of the abstract idea. It's almost more real than the many. It's based off the abstract idea in your mind of what a circle is, based on things you see in the physical world. You see the moon, you see the sun, you see tables, you see wheels. The drawing is the physical representation of the mental map that you have of the circle, right? So if you want to be the best drawer of circles in the whole world, right, you sit down and you do it slow first and you try to make it perfect, and then you go fast, and then you use a heavy pen and a light pen and a short pen and a long pen, and then you stand up, then you get on one leg, and then you get on a boat and it's rocking you around. But the goal is still to draw the perfect circle, right? It's to not allow the inevitable variability that exists in the world to screw up your best circle or your best pitch or your best swing. And I think where we get a little bit lost with it is the people that are talking about variability are saying like, oh yeah, it's impossible to do it the same way twice, so why try? No, it's not that. It's not that. That's not it, right? But the variation gives our brain and our body the ability to explore contrast, so we can find our repeatability in our movement and our best movement solutions, right? Our brain starts to get so myelinated into this one pattern, and it drives the same route to work every day in this one place, right? It can't feel differences very well. But when you start to explore these large, wide ranges of things, now your brain can have, you know what, I really don't like this one, I really don't like this one, I really don't like this. Somewhere in here is really good. So you open up the possibilities so you can narrow them down, and then you can narrow the bandwidth of the movement. We want to create reflexive, dynamic, and reciprocal movements that elicit all these elastic properties of the body. Okay, those elastic properties are really, really important, right? That combined with the sequencing is what allows a little guy to hit the ball really far, or a little guy to throw the ball really hard. Right? There are college kids all over the country that are 6'3", 225, throwing 82 and their arm hurts. And you just saw a 13-year-old throwing 90 miles an hour, right? All those college kids could, they could beat the crap out of that kid, but he throws harder than them. He throws harder. His arm probably feels better too, right? So we want to train that same system in our body. Everybody has these two systems. You have the elastic system, right? And then you have the muscular system, and they're not the same thing. Think about the muscular system as the Ford F-350. It's a high-performance machine, high-performance engine. It's built to take 30,000 pounds and tow it up a mountain for 350,000 miles. But then you think about the Ferrari, right? The Ferrari high-performance machine, built to go 0 to 60 in 3.1, stop on a dime and make hairpin turns. If you take a Ferrari and just try to tow 30,000 pounds up a mountain all the time, you're going to tear up the engine. You're going to tear up the engine. Same vice versa. This is a sport of greyhounds. We have to move really fast in small windows of time and space. We have to move fast and stop fast and stabilize fast and take hairpin turns, right? That reflexive system is everything. And we want to create rotational rate of force development in really small windows of time and space through the same planes of motion we use when we hit and when we throw, okay? And we want to use unstable loads, right? When you have instability from above, right? Guess what it forces your body to do down below? Stabilize. Stabilize. If you want your athletes to have more balance when they hit and throw, give them things that are unstable from up top, and now their system and their body has to find a way to stabilize, right? Your body works on a tightrope. If I have my arms out and you pull me this way, which way am I going to lean? I'm going to lean the opposite direction. It's the same exact thing. That instability from above is everything. So there's a lot of different ways we can do that. So if you take a look at this exercise on the bottom, you'll notice those boxes. One is a little higher, one's a little lower, right? Kind of mimicking the angles that will be on a mound, right? So we're doing pogos starting on the box, hopping off to back on, and then into a turn, right? So this is really dynamic, right? This is really difficult. One of the reasons that we love the pogo variations, if you watch all the best sprint coaches in the world right now, everybody's getting onto that. Right? Because it creates a really high rate of force development because of the change of direction. You want as little ground contact time as possible. You want to be in and out as quick as you can, because that's what all the best athletes do. They have springs that are built into their joints and built into their system. They have the ability to change direction incredibly, incredibly fast. So this helps us learn how to stop and stabilize in the ground and how to rotate at the same time. We want differential learning with variability and specificity, right? So when we do these things with athletes, we're trying all these different movements, right? But we're also talking to them about, how did this one feel? How did that one feel? Because if one might look a little better to me, but the athlete says the other one feels better, if you're a coach, you better consider, like, okay, well, why might that be the case? Is that because it's comfortable for him to do it that way, even though it's not right? Or is it because, it's no good, right? So when we watch athletes move, we have to consider all these things. We have to listen to their bodies also, because like Doug said earlier, you can't feel what they feel. You can't feel what they feel. So we're trying all these different things, right? So if you look at this one here, so we're transitioning to the mound. And we do exercises off the mound, but we got to blend them to the mound, because there's something very different about being on that slope. You'll see guys do stuff in flat ground and it's really good, and then you see them go to the mound, it's like, oh my God, like how did that happen? Like, well, why is that happening? So you want to get to the mound because that's where you make your money, and you want to figure out how to move well on the mound quickly, right? So on this one, he's hopping off the box onto the mound going forward. And the one in the middle, he's hopping backwards. Now, if we want somebody to be able to, say, hinge better, right, or they're going to throw from a lower slot, if you hop backwards, what does their upper body have to do? Naturally, you don't have to tell them anything. You're creating an environment and a task that's going to force their body into its best positions to move in different ways, right? Now, if we want somebody to go higher slot, guess what? We'll hop this way, so it creates the ability for them to lean back. Now, just because the athlete likes one or the other better doesn't mean that we don't keep messing around with all of them, but over time, they start to find, I really like this one, I really like this one, I really like that variation. And then we're able to kind of guide the process, but they're able to make the decisions on all these different things that they want to build into their repertoire and into their program, right? Forward move, right? We always talk about the forward move, but how do we ever work on it, right? It's like always with a ball. It's the same exact thing. If you challenge the body's ability and the brain's ability to transition energy from one side to the other side with lateral movement, right, and you give them instability with things like that, and actually weight, right, take that weight room, take that skill, bring them together, better things happen, right? If you have somebody that goes to the toe early and you hook them up to a sled and you put a whole bunch of weight on the sled and strap them up to it, I bet you they kind of stop going to the toe early because they can't move the weight. They can't move the weight. So you're creating an environment and a task, right, that's specific to what they need to do, and their brain and body are going to have to find a way to adapt to the change. Arm efficiency, right? Like we talked about, it's everything. The body is an unwinding tornado, okay? And this, if you want health, this has to work around this. Now, the caveat to that is that there's gray area. There's gray area. We had a kid come in one time, and when we did the evaluation, he was like 15 years old. He was like up to 86, and I thought his arm was going to blow up, right, watching him throw. It was ugly. Like the arm action was ugly, right? So after trying a couple things in the first 3 weeks, right, he didn't like any of them. He didn't like any of them, so I said, you know what? We got to get you in the lab. We got to do this right away. So we get him in the lab. We had him throw normally. His stress levels weren't through the roof. They were higher than the really low ones. On a CME system, he was around, because we had the same thing that Rolando had with the Rays. He was around like 80 to 90, right? So he wasn't in that 115 range, 120 range. So it was on the upper end, like the other kid that I talked about earlier, the one that was throwing 97 when he was 15, he was the first kid we ever got in the lab. For reference, he was 27 Newton meters at 15 years old throwing 93 miles an hour. So that's about as efficient and stress-free as it gets, right? When you start getting into that like 115, 130 range, now you're in like a tough spot, right? Now you're in a bad spot. That stress level is a little bit too high. He was in the 80s. He was in the 80s. So really what it was when we went back and thought about it, the first like 13 frames were like really kind of ugly, and he never got inside of 90, but it caught deep enough into external rotation before the turn, and it caught the energy of his trunk, and it worked around the same plane. So it makes sense. It makes sense. We're always going to see new things as coaches, and we always have to problem solve all these things and figure out what's best for the athlete, okay? So this is Freddie Freeman's son, throwing an absolute nuke into the stands, okay? This kid's like 5 years old. Oh, look, he recoils. Oh, no, nobody taught him that probably. That might just be a good thing for the body to do because it's representative of a good deceleration pattern. Those rubber bands are running out of room and it bounces back. But look at how that arm spirals. Oof, pretty, really, really pretty. Now, arm mapping. In my opinion, and I've been working with both hitters and pitchers now for about 10 years, for about 100 hours a week. Arm mapping is the hardest thing to do in player development. That's my opinion. I think it's the hardest thing to do. Over time, patterns become really, really ingrained and myelinated, and sometimes, especially with throwing, those patterns can be very difficult to change. Sometimes it's easy, but the truth is, if you just, a lot of times when you leave them alone when they're young, you really don't have to do any of that, right? It's just good, you just gotta keep it good. But this is some stuff that Paul Nyman said about, not particularly about arm mapping, but just about making alterations with pitchers. So he said, an area of particular interest to me is the difficulty in changing an ingrained movement pattern. Even more difficult, changing a ballistic movement pattern, right? Changing the pattern once ingrained requires more work. It's estimated that 10 times the initial number of repetitions must be performed in the new way to overwrite the existing pattern than establishing the pattern in the first place. So, I would agree with that. I wouldn't say that, like, you know, you can't know if it's exactly 10 times. You don't have any data on that, but, and it's always going to be different for different people. Some people have a higher degree of proprioceptive capability. Their brain can control their levers in space a little bit differently, a little bit easier. Your shortstops, right, are the guys that are going to have a little bit easier time doing that. But this is exactly why we go about our process the way we do. We never, and Dan Paff from Altus, so if you guys aren't familiar, Altus Sports Performance, like the #1 track and field training facility in the world. Dan is probably the most brilliant human being I've ever met when it comes to movement. He's like, I don't know, he's it. Like, that's one of my gold standards. Like, that's where I want to get to, is where he's at, like, mentally. And he trains world-class sprinters. And in all of their training, none of those gold medalists ever go max effort. None of them, ever. All of it is submaximal effort, all of it. I don't know if anybody's seen that recent tweet that Carl Lewis put out, that he was trying to run at like, what do you say, like 90% or 85% or something like that. To get the reflexive system to work, it has to be, the rubber bands have to be loose. They have to be loose, right? As soon as you create tension and muscle up, and we all know that's not a good thing, but then we've also created this environment that, because velocity is important, we're trying to tell everybody to throw as hard as they can, watching them try to muscle up to do it, right? And then they can't get to positions. Now they have to gain mobility and range just so they can get to the positions, right? When you move really well, right, when you have a tighter, more reflexive system, those rubber bands have a little bit more tension, it gives you the ability to, say, be easy for a long time and then get those rubber bands to snap and produce that force when they need to. So with our arm mapping process, when we go through that with players, we're going through sub-max efforts. We want volume over effort. We want a high volume, because I look at workload like this, right? And I don't think anyone is accurately measuring it, because when you think about measuring workload, you can't do it based on velocity. You can have two guys that both throw 90 miles an hour, right? They could both be the same size, same physical movement profile, except this guy has 125 Newton meters on his 90 mile an hour throw, and this guy has 25 Newton meters. So the workload is the volume, right, of throws added to the stress level. That's an accurate workload, right? The velocity is irrelevant of the stress level. Like, the stress level is what has to be calculated. So for us, we trust the athlete's feel more than anything else, because the interesting thing, hitters different than pitchers, is that hitters, a swing can, like, feel good and be crappy, but when you throw, if it feels bad, like, you know it, right? So your body and your brain are letting you know, I don't like that, that's bad, we got to make a change, right? So we go sub-max efforts so we can build up this large volume of work and get those rubber bands to start working the way that they need to, right? So We went this direction probably 6 years ago, probably about 6 years ago. And it's paid off tremendous, tremendous dividends, right? So even in bullpens, Kumar did not throw one pitch in our bullpens above 90 miles an hour. Not one above 90 miles an hour. We were not in the bullpen chasing velocity. In fact, there's a gentleman standing back there, Trevor Clifton. We were sitting at my house having a fire. And he says to me, Bleak, he goes, ain't you worried he ain't throwing one ball over 90 miles an hour? And I said, no. Because when the lights turn on, that system works. Right? We were training him to throw as hard as he could, as effortless as he could. Right? And when the effort goes down and the velo starts to go up, we're raising that floor. We're moving more efficiently, right? You heard Rolando talk about that earlier. Efficiency and economy of motion. So, when we do arm mapping, open to closed, work around the clock, okay? So, when you have guys in a more open position, their pelvis is already opened up, right? And it gives the arm space and freedom to be able to catch a turn this direction. So the degree of open we explore based on the degree of thoracic rotation that they have available. So you'll have guys go kind of all the way around, and you just start to figure out where their throws are best, right? So one guy might be over here that has more thoracic rotation, one guy that has less might be here. But when you're opened up, it allows some of these things to start to happen better. And when we work from an anchored position, and when we did testing on all the lab stuff on like rehab protocol and rehab programming, like a lot of times when guys come back, they throw really poorly early on. It delays the entire process, right? Because they're making easy throws at certain distances. Bro, the reason that you got hurt is because you're squatting, you know, your arm is moving poorly. It's like if I hurt my back because I'm squatting like this, and then I get my back healthy in 3 months, then I go back to squatting and do it like that. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you could put 50 pounds on the bar, you're still doing it like crap. And a few months from now, when it's 300 pounds, you're going to get hurt again, right? So we want to fix the arm action, but we want to do it from a stable base and an anchored position that creates an automatic deceleration pattern, right? The reason Tom House's study of throwing from the knees, when he said hip-shoulder separation gives you 80% of your velocity, right? That was an assumption. The reason was an assumption. What we know is that when you throw from your knees, you can get about 80% of your max velocity. It's because of the deceleration pattern. Your pelvis is anchored into the ground. Up here, the thorax is delivering everything. So you're reading how much force the thorax is actually producing into the arm. So when we do this arm mapping process, we'll go through 3 different anchored positions and tons of variations of them. We go from the knees, we go from feet together, we call it an auger position, and then we go from a wide base and we change the width of the base, right? And we explore more of an optimal kind of like length tension relationship of those rubber bands, right? And then we'll just work through around the clock, through all those positions, through all 3 of those anchored position drills. And then we just start to look for and find where is the arm moving best. Now, when you are open, that's working the back half of the move. So if you're doing it with the hitter, that's the depth of the barrel. But as we start to close off, now we're starting to work with direction and force transmission. How are we taking this stuff on the backside and transitioning it forward with direction and control to the front side? So this is just an example, and I wouldn't even say, I would say this drill maybe worked a little bit, but it wasn't great. We didn't do it all the time, but it is something that works for a lot of people. So there's no ball in his hand, and what he's doing, we call it the hang loose grip. Right? He's got his 3 fingers cupped in and pinky and thumb out. And all he's doing, he's standing facing open and he's trying to throw and get the thumb to run down behind his neck, right? And for some guy, and you can do a whole bunch of different cues with that too, right? Like roll it out front, right? There's a million different ones. And a lot of times when we do this stuff, we do it with eyes closed too. We do it with throws, right? Like we'll do eyes closed stuff all the time. We want to increase that feel. There's actually a kid that was here yesterday that goes to Walters. When we go around and work with schools and we do the evaluations, we try a whole bunch of different stuff with guys. And when we had him throw with it, when his eyes were open, he was like sitting in the bullpen like 83, right? We closed his eyes, and in 15 minutes he hit like 88. And he was throwing more strikes with his eyes closed and open. Everybody was like, the whole team was going nuts, right? So when your eyes are closed, a lot of the times it just allows things to happen just a little bit differently, just a little bit more naturally. There's no like forced direction, right? We're not holding anything inside of our plane of rotation, right? Baseball is a rotational sport. We have to allow ourselves to expand and rotate. Proximal in close to distal out away. It's like we lose that distal piece because we got to throw the ball straight, right? Or we got to take our knob to the ball, right? And it's not that those are bad cues either, because we use those all the time. It's just when and with who. So this is another interesting one. Is this going to play? So in this one, we put a ball, and I would say that this one worked, and you'll see a bunch of different variations in throws. He's not trying to do anything differently. He's just got the ball up here behind him, and it's elevated, and he's trying to reach back and grab it into the throw. And that day, it gave him a really, really good feel. Huh? Okay. When we cut the recording, I guess we can put it on. Well, that's a shame. It's a good one to watch. If anybody wants to see it, come up to me after the presentation. We can just play it. But basically, on the takeaway, he's trying to pick up the ball behind him here right into the throw, right? And you'll see it done with plyo balls first, and then after the plyo balls, we go to baseballs, and then we transition it to regular throws, and you saw the arm action like really start to clean up. And again, any of these ones I'm showing you, it's not that any one of these were particularly, the one, right? Again, it's exploring variations so you can start to figure out, and the more of those things that you try and that you do, the better their brain has the ability to control their limbs in space and the better feels they get, right? So it's like you keep trying all these different things. That's why the end goal has to be like moving well, right? Moving well produces velocity, it produces health, it produces stuff, it produces command, right? If you move well, you get all of those things. So when you work with the athlete, if you can get on the same page with what you're trying to accomplish, then it's just an open-ended process of how do we get there? So when we go into the throwing stuff, like I said, we're giving them all these different variations of stuff. We're moving the feet are stable, we're doing different cues, we're doing different feels, and we're just trying to find those good feels. The ones where the guy goes, ah, that's it. That feels so good. And they'll notice the differences. That last video wasn't playing? That last video wouldn't play? There was another one. No, not that one. There was one after. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that wasn't good. But watch. You see at the end right there, he went like that. It was closer to the feel that he was looking for, right? And athletes feel it. When you get their arm to feel good and they understand how it's supposed to move, now they're capable of trying different things on their own and making adjustments. You're making them their own best coach. You're giving them their goal. They know that they need to get it on plane, and they know what it feels like, because now you start to feel some really good throws, and then they can chase that feeling, right? And Doug talked about it earlier. Feeling is everything for athletes. It's everything, right? And when they start to understand what they're looking for and what they need to feel, awesome things happen. Yeah, this was the one. It's starting to catch deep. Like if you watch these slow, it's starting to catch from behind, and really when the trunk initiates rotation, all of this is getting launched out and around. See, that's the thing. Like when we throw a ball, like we want this right here to get launched around the spine. We want the force and the energy from the trunk to deliver the arm. Now, interestingly, one of the things that really worked for him was telling him to throw with all arm. The thought, throw all arm. And when you think about it, all these thoughts do is put our body in different positions. If your arm is late to the party, and then you think to throw all arm, Now your arm's going to be just a little bit earlier to the party in a better position, right? So mound blending. You got to get to the mound as quickly as you can, and you got to do as much of it as you can. And I personally, I don't think people do enough off of the mound. I mean, that's, Corey said it earlier, that's where you make your money. If you look at the Braves in the 90s, they had a pretty incredible pitching staff for a long time. Leo Mazzoni was a huge proponent of being on the mound. They were on the mound a couple times a week. They didn't throw any flat grounds. Everything was off the mound. And if you think flat grounds are good because it's less stress, that's completely false. That kid earlier that I showed you, that was the one that I was talking about, that was 97 at 15. When we tested him on the mound versus flat ground, his velocity was like 84, and then his stress level was over 100. Even though on the mound it was 93 and it was only like 27. So stress is also based on how the body is actually moving and whether it's moving in good positions, right? So I would try to get away from flat grounds, and I would try to get to mound work as much as you can. And I would try to do things on the mound that are representative of how they need to move that aren't throwing a ball. Get their body to learn how to transition weight from one side to the other in a good position, stabilize and rotate. And when that happens, right, and you start to do these things with them, all that talking to them about, hey, you got to stay closed longer, you got to keep that front hip in, you got to keep that front shoulder in. Well, now they're actually doing it, and now they're actually feeling it. Right? You're training the things that you want to happen with the ball without the ball. And then all of a sudden, the stuff with the ball happens. In the beginning, I talked about how, the athletes will show you how they move with the water bag, right? As the water bag stuff improves, guess what? So does all the other stuff. They're training the same movements. So now it's starting to look cleaner, right? Easier, more effortless, right? All of these things started to come together. And over time, you start to see that bandwidth narrow in of better things, right? And that's because of all of the variability that he was given and the specificity as well. So, physically, he was the best he's ever looked. Might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. This is what he looked like in one of his first starts. Very different. Very different. Velocity went up a whole bunch. First start, he hit 99. 99. Making it look easier and more effortless. Right? The funny thing is when you hear people look at it and they comment like, some people say, oh, but that's all arm, he's not using his legs, right? Actually, if you look at his ground forces, he's using his legs, especially his front leg, better, right? Better. He's moving easier. And then you hear other people say, man, that looks like a warm-up pitch, and he's throwing the ball 98. Right, that's the point. That's the point. He's making throwing hard look easy because he's moving more efficiently. And we did that not by chasing velocity, but by chasing better movement. We have issues in this game now with certain things that are we think to be right, but just that aren't. I mean, in the history of this game, did anybody ever try to max out velos in a bullpen? Was Nolan Ryan doing that? Was Randy Johnson doing that? Was anybody doing that? No. They were focusing on how they were moving and moving cleaner and finding their locations. Right? Does that mean that some people don't have to try to throw hard? No, that's not what it means. Right? But it means that if you're tracking a guy and saying that he's not where he needs to be just because he's matching a number that you think he should be at, but in games his splits are considerably higher, I mean, look at splits. If tons of guys are, 88 in bullpens or 85 in bullpens or 91 in bullpens, then in games it's, 92 or 95. Just because the guy's throwing low effort in bullpens doesn't mean that he can't throw hard in games, and by trying to force him to throw hard in bullpens, it doesn't mean he's going to throw harder in games, right? How they're moving is responsible for delivering that force and delivering that energy. And when you focus on economy of motion and efficiency, awesome things end up happening. So, doesn't look so violent, looks different, looks easy. Less effort at the point of release. And Jeff Ponce said this was cool, that the vertical, like it was later in the, his arm isn't vertical like it was later in the season, because that's exactly what it was. His arm was vertical. He saw that. And at the end of the day, like, all we did was try to make Kumar Rocker the best version of himself. We helped guide. He was in charge. We tried to get him to be the best version of himself, not try to get him to match something that we think is supposed to, it's supposed to be. When you look back at, that's why we do those evaluations like that. When you look at that high school video, the coolest thing that anybody said about it, I forget which writer, but it was somebody, I think, for Baseball America. He said, Kumar looks like he did in high school, just a better version. That was the idea. We said that in the evaluation. We need to get you back to this, but just make it a clean and polished version of it. And I guess all the hard work paid off, right? And what was really cool was in the interview, one of the things that he said was that they asked him what he learned over the last year. What was the biggest, most impactful thing? And he said to walk by faith, not by fear. And we had that conversation sitting in Doc's barn. Because an athlete like that that's already getting drafted in the first round, choosing to make a choice to change things, that can be a tough choice sometimes, right? But on the other side, amazing things can happen, right? So if anybody wants to get in touch with us, here's some of our information, Twitter, Instagram handle. Thank you guys so much.